world. Joining us now, former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland. Hi, good
Morning,
to see
Kate.
you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Why don't we pick up on that? Do you think that Keir Starmer should be taking money from Just Stop, somebody who supports Just Stop Oil?
No, I don't. I think that the Just Stop Oil protesters cross a line between legitimate freedom of speech and freedom of expression, which this country is renowned for, and the sort of behaviour that really disrupts the lives of the rest of us. And we've seen in recent weeks how people have, in effect, quite visibly taken matters into their own hands. Now, I don't think that's advisable. I think we should allow the police to get on with the job that they are there to do. But one can understand the frustrations that people have. They want to get on with their daily lives. They've got commitments, sometimes very serious commitments to see loved ones in hospital, for example, being disrupted in a way that I think most of us find unacceptable. And therefore, if this leader of the opposition aspires to be a responsible leader and a Prime Minister of this country, then I think associations of that nature really perhaps tell a different story, which I think might lead to the conclusion that, frankly, they're not ready to govern.
Yeah, so just to clarify on that story, Just Stop Oil is supported by a guy called Dale Bince, who's in charge of electricity, who's also given £1.5 million to the Labour Party, just to clarify that.
Yes.
Talk to me about Rishi Sunak. He is claiming success over the drop in recent migrant crossings. Is it down to his policies, or is it because of the weather?
Well, I think that the big intervention that he made late last year was getting that deal with Albania to get back to Albania those individuals who are crossing here unlawfully, and many people in our prisons as well who we needed to repatriate. That deal clearly is working. The number of Albanians has dropped, I think, by about 90%. There has been a slight change, some other different nationalities coming across, but the overall figure to June is about 20% down on where it was last year. So I think that he can claim legitimate credit for the direct, practical measures that he's been taking in the last few months. And I think he deserves some praise for that.
So why is he not managing to get that message across? Because a recent poll says 50% of people think the government's doing a bad job.
Well, I think that the history of this has been very, very difficult, and governments of different colours have had to deal with various manifestations of migrancy and refugee status. And I think the public, understandably, are somewhat cynical when they look at the figures and think, well, it's all very well having laws, but if they're not enforced, then what does all of this add up to? And therefore what we have to do is demonstrate by actions and by results that things can be turned around. You know, remember a few years ago, Kay, the Channel Tunnel was a real nightmare in terms of security and people trying to get in. That problem was solved by Britain and France. You know, I was on the Channel last week, and there was no question that it wasn't anything other than a secure way through. Now, we did the same with lorries. Remember the terrible business with lorries a few years ago where people were dying in the backs of lorries? That problem was dealt with. The small boats is, if you like, a reaction, the next stage in which unscrupulous people try and find a way through to this country. We've just got to be very, very practically minded about this, working closely with the French to deepen and improve the relationship we have with them on this, and to take that international action that the Prime Minister quite rightly is leading.
I love the fact that you called it the Channel. You're showing your age. It's highly likely that the government will lose their legal action against the COVID inquiry. So why are they doing it?
Well, I have asked that question in the House of Commons yesterday. I did ask that question. I think it would have been far better for lawyers on both sides to agree what should be relevant and used in the inquiry. You know, these aren't items that should find themselves into the public domain unless there's a clear relevance to them and that they form the basis of decisions by Baroness Hallett. You know, I don't see why we've ended up in this standoff, bearing in mind the fact the inquiry is going to take a long time, and all that this does is prolong matters further. Now, I'm told they're going to hear the case as early as next week, which I think is encouraging, but you know, I do ask the question, what was this really necessary, bearing in mind...
Makes it look as though the government's got something to hide.
Well, I can understand that sentiment. I think, to be fair to the government, what they're asking about is the breadth by which the chair of the inquiry has in which to operate. You know, does she have this unlimited...
They set up the inquiry.
Well, indeed, and the law says that it is for the chair to determine what is relevant. Now, unless they can show that the chair's got it really badly wrong and that somehow she's doing some massive fishing expedition, then I think they're up against it. I'm not going to
Shouldn't she be allowed to have whatever she wants, like with the Chilcot inquiry?
Well, I think that if the chair is true to the terms of reference, the terms of reference are very wide when you look at them, then I think she's entitled to make an informed judgment about what she regards as relevant. And I think that to challenge it in this way potentially risks undermining the chair and her discretion and creates an unnecessary standoff, which, as you say, gives the impression that somehow the government has something to hide. I mean, the government continues to disclose, thousands of documents to the inquiry, as they should do. But I just think this particular approach doesn't help anybody. Far better to get round the table, agree what is relevant, and let the inquiry get on with its job.
The Cabinet Office Minister Jeremy Quinn, addressing Parliament yesterday, as you know, said all relevant material has and will be provided to the COVID inquiry. Is it not up to Baroness Outler to decide what's relevant?
Well, the law clearly says, the Inquiries Act, which forms the basis of this inquiry, clearly says that it is for the chair to determine what is relevant. The government is saying that a lot of the material is clearly or manifestly or unambiguously irrelevant.
That's not for them to decide.
Well, I think that, bearing in mind the clear wording of that statute, that law, then it would be far better to defer to the chair of the inquiry. Yes, to make reasonable points about, the terms of reference and sticking true to the terms of reference, but to launch a legal challenge, I thought was unnecessary, and it would have been far better to negotiate and deal with this in a way that I think would have respected the discretion of the chair.
A chair of a bereaved families group says if she doesn't get everything that she's asking for, that she has no alternative but to resign. Do you agree?
Well, I can understand why that's being said.
But do you agree?
Well, I still think that there is time here for the government to acknowledge the fact that this was unnecessary, that it is for the chair to decide what is relevant. I certainly wouldn't want to see Baroness Hallett depart. I think she's been an outstanding lawyer and public servant for many years, well respected, and I think she's doing an excellent job. And therefore, I think the government need to be mindful of this, that we shouldn't be putting, the government shouldn't be putting the chair of the independent inquiry into a difficult position.
There are now more independent MPs than sitting Lib Dem MPs. Should Bob Stewart join them?
Well, without knowing the full facts as to why...
But in the meantime, until we do understand the full facts.
I think that each case really stands or falls on its own merits. I think that Mr Stewart's case is coming up very quickly. I'm not going to pass a glib judgment as to whether he should be an independent MP.
At least in the short term.
Well, I think it depends on each individual fact. I mean, if you strip things back to, MPs perhaps falling foul of the law, I mean, obviously, I think speeding matters, although, they can be significant, perhaps fall into a different category. I'm not sure this falls into the same category as perhaps some of the other, alleged infringements that have resulted in losing the whip. I don't think it brings any wider implications for safety and security in Westminster in the working place. And therefore, I think that I can understand why, unless the whips change their mind, that at this stage there is no need to change Mr Stewart's status as a Conservative MP.
Sir Robert, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciated. Thank you.